I'm Zoe, 18, standing in my bedroom staring at my shredded W-2 forms scattered across the floor like confetti of my mother's latest manipulation. For years, she'd pulled stunts like this, sabotaging my job applications, hiding my mail, anything to keep me dependent on her. "If you don't like it, go complain to your father," she'd always sneer, knowing I never would. But this time was different. This time, I picked up the phone and dialed his number. What happened next didn't just cost her those monthly child support checks, it stripped away every ounce of control she had over our family forever. It all started when my parents got divorced. My sister was barely 6 in kindergarten, and I was not more than 8. My mom got full custody of. One such example was when I was still 8, sitting cross-legged on our living room carpet, trying to fix my favorite toy car, a bright red Matchbox that had somehow lost its wheels during the move to our new apartment. The tiny plastic pieces were scattered everywhere, and I was getting frustrated trying to snap them back on. "Mommy, can you help me fix this?" I asked, holding up the broken car. She barely glanced up from the stack of papers she was shuffling through. "Your father bought you that cheap junk, and now look what happened. Maybe if he cared enough to send us real money instead of scraps, you'd have toys that don't fall apart." Her voice had that sharp edge I was already learning to recognize, the one that meant I'd somehow done something wrong just by existing. Even at 8, I knew every inconvenience, every shortage, every moment of her frustration got redirected toward my father. When there was nothing for breakfast and my stomach growled loudly enough to wake her up, she'd snap, "It's your father's fault we can't afford groceries, so go cry to him about it." But everything spiraled completely out of control during my senior year of high school. A few months before summer, my grandmother passed away and left my mom close to $95,000. A small fortune back in the 2010s. Instead of using it responsibly, Mom treated it like she'd won the lottery. She quit her job immediately, claiming she deserved a break after all these years of struggling. By the time school started again in August, every penny was gone. Blown on shopping sprees, restaurant meals, and endless nights out with her drinking buddies while she acted like some carefree teenager instead of a mother with 2 kids to support. When I asked where the money went, she'd wave her hand dismissively and say, "I needed that time to heal and find myself." The utilities started getting shut off in October. First the cable, then the phone, then the electricity. I'd come home from my part-time job at the local grocery store to find us eating peanut butter sandwiches by candlelight while Mom sat on the couch painting her nails, completely unbothered by our situation. "You have a job, why can't you just pay it?" she'd say when I pointed out we had no food or that the water was about to be disconnected. The most infuriating part was watching her parade around with my dad's monthly child support check, waving it like a trophy. "Look what came in the mail, Mommy's paycheck," she'd sing, cashing it immediately and spending it on whatever caught her fancy that week, never on actual necessities for me and my sister. When I brought up the fact that the money was supposed to be for our care, she'd roll her eyes and mutter something about saving for my sister's college tuition taking up all the funds, which I later discovered was complete nonsense. Fast forward to when I am about to choose a college, and my mom keeps bellyaching about the costs, and of course had zero saved in a college fund for me. I was only offered a partial scholarship, so that meant I couldn't go to a private university. I had no choice but to go to a reasonably priced and still highly regarded state university. I managed to scrape together enough money for my freshman year through financial aid and grants, thanks to filing my taxes and FAFSA early with my W-2s from senior year. I was actually proud of myself, living on campus, handling my own finances, finally feeling independent from my mother's chaos. But then came the phone call that would shatter everything. I was in my dorm room, stressed out of my mind because my sophomore year financial aid application was due soon and I still hadn't received my W-2s. They should have arrived at home weeks ago. I called my sister to ask if she'd seen any mail for me. "Sarah," her voice was tight, careful. "I need to tell you something. I saw Mom going through the mail last weekend when I was home. She had your W-2s in her hands, and I watched her. I watched her shred them. She threw the pieces right in the kitchen trash." There was a beat of silence. I wanted to tell you right away, but you know how she is. She makes you feel like you're crazy, like you're imagining things, or that you'll be next. My stomach dropped like I'd been punched. What do you mean she shredded them? She literally put them through the paper shredder. All of them. Then she acted like nothing happened. I felt sick. Those W-2s weren't just pieces of paper. They were my lifeline to staying in college. Without them, I couldn't complete my FAFSA. Without financial aid, I was done. My education, my future, everything I'd worked for, she'd destroyed it all with the casual cruelty of feeding documents into a machine. When I came home for spring break, the tension in the house was suffocating. I found my mom in the living room, flipping through a magazine like she didn't have a care in the world. "Mom, where are my W-2s?" I asked directly, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. She barely looked up. "What W-2s?" "The ones that came in the mail. I know you saw them." Her eyes flicked toward me, calculating. "Oh, those. I gave them to Linda. She's going to do your taxes for you, since she's a CPA and all. Much better than you trying to figure it out yourself." It was such a smooth lie, delivered with the same casual tone she'd used to blame my father for everything over the years. But this time, she'd picked the wrong person to lie about. Linda was kinda like a big aunt to me and my sister. We got close because one of us was always babysitting for her, and she'd always tell us we were doing an awesome job. My sister, bless her heart, didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, dialing Linda right there in front of Mom. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, as the phone rang. Mom's eyes darted frantically, a trapped animal caught in the headlights. The jig was up. "Linda? Hi, it's Zoe's sister. Quick question, do you have Zoe's W-2s? Mom said she gave them to you." I watched my mother's face go pale as Linda's concerned voice carried through the speaker. "W-2s? No, honey, I don't have any of your tax information." "Why would I? Is everything okay?" A look of panic flashed across my mother's face. Linda's voice continued, getting more worried. "This sounds serious. You need to request duplicate W-2s immediately and have them sent to your address. I'll do yours and your sister's taxes for free if you need help, no charge. I know what your mom can be like." We offered to pay or babysit for her as payback, but she insisted on helping for free. As Linda's voice came through the speaker, a dam seemed to break in Sarah too. Later, after Linda had confirmed the lie, and we were alone, Sarah would admit that seeing Mom caught red-handed and hearing Linda's genuine concern made her finally piece together all the other strange things she'd noticed. That summer between sophomore and junior year, I was working full-time at 2 different jobs, mornings at a retail store, evenings at a restaurant, scraping together every penny I could for the upcoming semester. Meanwhile, my mother was living like she was on permanent vacation, sleeping until noon and spending her afternoons by the community pool with her friends, acting like she didn't have a care in the world. The breaking point came when I used my own hard-earned money to buy a new laptop so I could keep up with my coursework and apply for internships. She completely lost it. "You're selfish and irresponsible," she screamed, her face twisted with rage. "You should be paying the dial-up phone bill so I can have proper internet access, not wasting money on your little toys." The irony was suffocating. I was working myself to exhaustion while maintaining a spot in the honors program, and she was furious that I wouldn't fund her endless hours of online gossip and window shopping. "You should just drop out," she'd sneer, her words laced with venom whenever I'd come home exhausted from a double shift. "You're obviously not cut out for college life anyway." Her martyr act intensified into a sickening performance for anyone who would listen. She'd tell neighbors and relatives how difficult I was, how ungrateful I'd become, how she was struggling to support me through college. The lies rolled off her tongue so smoothly, painting herself as the suffering saint and me as the selfish burden. All while my father's child support checks continued arriving monthly, checks she'd wave around like trophies before spending on whatever caught her fancy that week. That summer, the weariness became unbearable. The emotional exhaustion was a physical ache that settled deep in my bones, making every movement feel like I was walking through thick mud. There were nights I'd stare at the ceiling in my cramped childhood bedroom, tears silently tracing paths down my face, wondering if I could even continue. The thoughts came in waves, dropping out, taking a gap year, maybe running away to crash on a friend's couch across the country. Anything to escape the suffocating cycle of working myself to death while she lived in luxury off money that was supposed to be helping me succeed. I was so utterly depleted, so convinced I was drowning, and she was the one holding my head underwater while telling everyone who'd listen that I just wasn't strong enough to swim. The worst part was how she'd made me doubt myself. Maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I was asking for too much, expecting too much, dreaming too big for someone like me. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor one particularly brutal night, surrounded by bills and work schedules, calculating and recalculating how I could possibly afford another semester. The numbers never added up. No matter how many hours I worked, how many meals I skipped, how many textbooks I bought used or borrowed, there was always a gap that should have been filled by the support she was legally obligated to provide. That's when something shifted inside me. The desperation transformed into something sharper, more focused. I was tired of being her victim. I was tired of her using my father as a scapegoat for her own failures as a mother. Maybe it was time to take her advice literally. 3 weeks before my junior year was supposed to start, I got a call from the university's financial aid office that made my blood run cold. Due to my late FAFSA submissions. Thanks to the fact that, miraculously, my W-2 had gone missing at home after my mom took delivery of them, my aid package had been drastically reduced. I owed nearly $10,000 immediately, or I wouldn't be allowed to register for classes. $10,000. I might as well have owed $10 million. I called the financial aid office in desperation, explaining my situation, begging for an extension or payment plan. The woman on the other end was professionally sympathetic but firm. I'm sorry, but without payment or a cosigner for an emergency loan, you cannot enroll this semester. You'll need to defer until spring. Defer until spring. The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. All my friends would graduate ahead of me. My carefully planned course sequence would be derailed. My scholarships for next year would be in jeopardy. Everything I'd worked for, sacrificed for, was crumbling because of my mother's sabotage. I called her, desperate and panicked. Mom, I need help. The university says I owe complain to your father, she interrupted, her voice cold and dismissive. I've told you 1,000 times, he doesn't give me enough money to help you kids. This is his responsibility, not mine. The line went dead. I was alone, sitting in my dorm room, staring at an impossible debt that stood between me and my future. My mother's words, complain to your father, echoed in my head, not as a taunt this time, but as a chilling directive. She meant it as a dismissal, but in that moment of absolute despair, it became the only path left. With trembling fingers, I found his number, a contact I rarely used, and sent a desperate text, Dad, I don't know what to do. I might have to drop out of college. The next morning, as I sat on a bench outside the dorm, defeated and trying to figure out how to call my professors to explain why I wouldn't be in their classes, my dad appeared with a coffee and a donut. His presence was calm, steady, everything my mother wasn't. I opened up to him completely. And for the first time in years, I felt like someone was truly, unconditionally in my corner. He listened as I explained, his expression growing grimmer with every word. Zoe, he said, his voice laced with genuine regret, I had no idea it was this bad. Your mother always complained about money, but I honestly thought it was just her usual dramatics. I trusted she was using the support for you and your sister, for your educations. He paused, shaking his head. I should have been more involved, should have seen through it. What followed was the most surreal morning of my life. We went from office to office, financial aid, student accounts, the registrar. My dad moved with calm determination, asking the right questions, filling out paperwork, his checkbook ready. He co-signed an emergency loan without hesitation and paid the remaining balance out of pocket. The relief was overwhelming. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for weeks suddenly lifted. I could breathe again. I could stay in school. My future was secure. But more than that, I felt protected. For the first time since I was 6 years old, I had someone fighting for me instead of against me. Over lunch, after the financial chaos was handled, my dad leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "You know," he said, stirring his coffee slowly, "your mother always did have a peculiar way of managing money, especially when it came to obligations." A cold premonition stirred in my gut. The way he said obligations made it sound like there was something specific he was referring to, something I didn't know about. He said, "After your text, I realized I needed to confirm everything I'd suspected and gather irrefutable proof. The bank statements, payment records, receipts, there were no problems getting them because I started compiling them years ago, just in case, never truly believing it would come to this. I've been sending her enough to cover both of your education, plus living expenses," he said quietly. "I thought she was helping you kids. I had no idea she was telling you to come to me for more. Every time she'd ask for more or complain, I just assumed she was exaggerating for sympathy, that she was still funneling it into your lives. I was so wrong. I should have looked closer. I rarely tried to keep in touch with you and your sister because I was avoiding being tagged as abusive by your mom. She got a divorce based on the accusation that I was abusive to her and you both. The wave of emotion that hit me was overwhelming. Not just hurt, but a searing, righteous anger that burned through every cell in my body. All those years she'd made me feel small, worthless, guilty for even existing, for needing food, for wanting an education, for daring to dream of a future beyond her toxic control. Meanwhile, she literally lived off money meant for us, for our future. The worthless one wasn't me. It was her. "Zoe," my dad quietly called my name. "Will you be willing and ready?" My throat tightened. "Ready for what?" "To testify. To let me take her to court and reroute every dollar directly to you and your sister." He tapped a highlighted line in the paperwork, "Child support laws in our state. If we prove misuse, the judge can terminate payments and force sale of the house. But it'll get a bit ugly." I didn't hesitate. "Do it." I called her that evening, keeping my voice carefully neutral, even a little bit defeated. I played dumb, pretended to accept her blame, letting her think she'd won another round of her twisted game. "You're right, Mom," I sighed into the phone, injecting just enough resignation to make it believable. "I should have planned better for these college expenses. I guess I'll just have to complain to Dad about this." There was a beat of silence on the line, a flicker of what I imagined was annoyance, before she dismissed it with that familiar, condescending laugh. "Good luck with that," she said smugly. "He barely gives me enough to keep the lights on. Maybe he'll finally understand how hard it is to raise you kids on nothing." She had no idea the fuse I had just lit. A month later, my phone rang, vibrating with an almost frantic energy that made my dorm room feel like it was shaking. It was Mom. Her voice, usually so practiced in its victimhood, was now a raw, unhinged shriek that made me hold the phone away from my ear. "You selfish little bastard," she screamed, her words grating on my ears like fingernails on a chalkboard. "What did you do?" I'd been expecting this call, but the sheer venom in her voice still sent adrenaline coursing through my system. I forced myself to sound calm, almost bored. "Hi, Mom. What's wrong?" "Don't you dare play dumb with me," she spat. "Your father dragged me to court last week. He had everything: bank statements, payment records, receipts. Everything." The satisfaction that bloomed in my chest was intoxicating. My dad had laid out every single payment, every child support check, every expense he'd paid directly to my sister's university, and every dollar I'd scraped together myself. He'd proven she hadn't contributed a dime to either of our educations despite receiving enough money to at least help out. "The judge saw right through my explanations," she continued, her voice cracking with panic. "He's cutting off child support completely since you're almost done with college anyway. But worse, he's stopping the mortgage payments too. Sarah, they're going to sell the house. I'm going to lose everything." The house she'd been living in rent-free for over a decade while pocketing child support money. The irony was delicious. She launched into her usual litany of guilt trips, but this time her desperation was palpable. You're so selfish. I sacrificed everything for you kids. I never got to go to college. I never had carefree years like you're having. For the first time in my life, her manipulation fueled me instead of crushing me. I took a deep breath, letting her hysteria wash over me, then delivered my first line with ice in my veins. Well, Mom, I said, my voice steady and eerily calm, my tuition must cost a lot more than what you got in child support. Because you were never able to help me with the costs of school, were you? The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear her brain scrambling for a response, for some way to twist this back on me. She sputtered something incoherent, then tried to pivot to her lifelong suffering. I never had carefree years like you. I've been working and struggling my whole life. That was my opening. The moment I'd been waiting for. Carefree years. I scoffed, a genuine, bitter laugh escaping me. Mom, you haven't worked a day since Grandma died 3 years ago. While I was working 2 jobs and going to school full-time, you were living a carefree life off my father's money. You were sleeping until noon, going out with friends, shopping whenever you wanted. Don't you dare talk to me about carefree years. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow, like a cornered animal. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely controlled rage. You have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea what I've sacrificed. I know exactly what you've sacrificed, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word. Nothing. You sacrificed nothing. You took money meant for your children's futures and spent it on yourself while making us feel guilty for needing basic necessities. The feeling of pure, unadulterated triumph swelling in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For 18 years, she'd made me feel small, worthless, like I was asking for too much just by existing. Now, finally, the truth was out, and she was the one left scrambling for excuses. You told me to complain to my father, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. So I did. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear her brain scrambling for a response, for some way to twist this back on me. She sputtered something incoherent, then tried to pivot to her lifelong suffering. I never had carefree years like you. I've been working and struggling my whole life. That was my opening. The moment I'd been waiting for. Carefree years. I scoffed, a genuine, bitter laugh escaping me. Mom, you haven't worked a day since Grandma died 3 years ago. While I was working 2 jobs and going to school full-time, you were living a carefree life off my father's money. You were sleeping until noon, going out with friends, shopping whenever you wanted. Don't you dare talk to me about carefree years. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow, like a cornered animal. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely controlled rage. You have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea what I've sacrificed. I know exactly what you've sacrificed, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word. Nothing. You sacrificed nothing. You took money meant for your children's futures and spent it on yourself while making us feel guilty for needing basic necessities. The feeling of pure, unadulterated triumph swelling in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For 18 years, she'd made me feel small, worthless, like I was asking for too much just by existing. Now, finally, the truth was out, and she was the one left scrambling for excuses. You told me to complain to my father, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. So I did.